think we need more evidence of this. I think if you'd asked that question about Nadal or even been to a final before, they had to make another press room outside of the press room to house the amount of people who wanted to be part of it. And the additional media duties for all of us,
Hello, welcome along to the story of here at the MODUS Super Series, where we have a look back at the careers of some of the biggest stars in the sport. Today we have a look back at the career of the 2024 world champion, Luke Humphries. When we say look back, it's kind of a look into the future as well. Still the world number one, and still in some people's eyes, or many people's eyes, the dominant force in the sport. Now, Paul Nicholson has charted his career, whether it was when he was a player towards the tail of his career or at the beginning of his broadcasting career. And the story of Luke Humphries is kind of a twofold one, isn't it? A player that burst onto the scene when he was young, went through a little bit of adversity, then turned into this machine that just wins big titles everywhere he goes.
Yeah, there comes a time in everybody's career where they've got to figure out where they're going to go. And I think for Luke, you can split his development tour and challenge tour career into the first half, and then obviously after winning the World Youth Championship, what he's done after that is chapter 2, but there's going to be plenty more chapters after that, that's for sure. But to this stage, he's had 2 sections of his career, and both of them have been successful.
And if you look at his profile, you look at his stature in the game, considering that he's only really come to dominance in the sport over, the last 18 months or so, picked up his first World Grand Prix title in 2023, he has probably become one of the most recognisable figures that this sport has possibly ever had.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think his legacy is far from written, but the groundwork of his legacy is exceptional, because what he's done has been likened to some of the greatest players ever, like Phil Taylor, Gary Anderson and Michael van Gerwen. But I think we have to start with his development tour career. He had rivals, plenty of them, around 2016 to 2020, winning a ridiculous amount of events for the under-25s. And it all culminated by winning the World Youth Championship, of course. But I think at this point, he was one of the better players, if not the best player in his age group. And he was being pushed by a lot of other great players, obviously. But he wasn't actually figuring out the player he was going to be yet. It would actually take adversity for him to find that out.
In terms of what he did on the youth tour, what do you think he learnt during his time on the dev tour and dominating that particular circuit?
That he could be competitive, that the rivals he would maybe have later in his career, he was seeing what they were capable of, and he was trying to figure out what kind of player he was going to be. Because I remember a game so vividly in my own mind, because we had qualifiers for the Grand Slam of Darts, and they were playing the World Youth Championship early rounds. And this used to be traditional. It was the same when James Hubbard came through in the early part of the 2010s. But I remember watching a semi-final between Dimitri van den Berg and Luke Humphries. Luke missed 1 dart for the match in the semi, and Dimitri took it out. And Luke's reaction was one of, he felt like the world had just ended. Now, this is what young players tend to feel when they don't succeed. They think the world is crumbling around them. And this is something that everybody has to learn. It wasn't the end of the world. It just felt like it. But his response after that, it was very solid. He maybe wasn't the most explosive player at this point, but boy, was he consistent at that level.
Is this the epitome of Luke? And of course, we'll talk a little bit more about it as time goes on, that he had a maturity and he had this learning, this understanding that whatever happened before, he was able to recover from it, use it as lessons and make him a better player going forward.
Oh, yeah. He maybe didn't know it early in the development tour career, but I think if he looks back on it now, he was able to improve through adversity, whether it was a loss or something in his personal life. He was able to stay strong, and I think he's a lot stronger than he gives himself credit for. He's definitely a lot more darts intelligent than 99% of the players that I've ever met, or indeed, and I don't want to be brash about this, but he's a lot more intelligent than most of the people that anyone's ever met when it comes to the way that darts fly. He's found a formula that really works, and it's not the norm. because he's the only person who uses that really long stem. Other people have tried, but they can't use it as effectively as Humphries.
So let's talk about some of the breakthrough moments then. The World Youth Championship and the first World Championship, particularly the World Championship in 2019, where he gets through, he plays Rob Cross. Cross was the defending champion at that point. Not just as he beat Rob Cross, he demolishes him, if the truth be told. And he did that amidst what was a bit of a struggle at the time. He's openly admitted that he was suffering with anxiety. He was having panic attacks on the stage. What does that say about him, that those issues and those problems, they're very, very serious, but no matter how tough and how troublesome it was, he managed to find a way of winning a big game?
Well, what a lot of people tend to forget is that he lost his first ever World Championship match in a prelim round, because he qualified through the development tour and he went into the prelims and lost. And at that time, people were saying Humphries is going to be a huge star, and he was under some sort of pressure, but it didn't come immediately. But wasn't it weird that even though he wasn't a title winner in the PDC, he seemed to come alive at Christmas? He was able to make the quarterfinals of the World Championship, and you thought, well, hang on a minute. Maybe we found his format, the one that he's best at, which is set play, little bursts, and he was playing some great games at Alexandra Palace and found his feet, winning decent amounts of money as well. When he got his first £50,000 paycheck, he was actually the person who knocked me off the tour, and when he found that out, he was a little bit guilty, and I said, don't worry about it. It's just the way it goes. And we've become pretty good friends after that. But he had this ability to soak up the situation, which looks full of pressure. You remember the dart that he didn't throw for the 180 on the stage, and he beamed this big smile to the audience as if to say, I fooled you. Thing is, underneath this focused machine, there is a sense of humour. There is a lightness about his attitude as well. But it took him a while to find that, to take the pressure off his entire game.
And then, as I say, you had that World Championship one. Then he had to deal again with another bit of adversity in his career. But then one thing he would do is change his lifestyle, change the way he approaches the sport. And one thing that he's been very open with is how he's lost a lot of weight to try and make him a better player. And there's no surprise that the way that he's changed his lifestyle has then corresponded into him slowly but surely getting better results.
Well, I have a very vivid opinion on where things started for Humphries in his we're going to say adult career, because now that the PDC youth system was behind him, I am 100% certain that the most important game that allowed him to change his life was when he lost to Paul Lim at the 2021 World Championship. He went into that game, he knew it was going to be tough. He sought some advice from some people to, how to play in that environment and how to play against Paul Lim, a legendary player who'd taken out some other great players in the previous seasons. He didn't win that match, but I think going home that Christmas and changing his life from that point was super important. Because what did he start doing within months? He made the UK Open final. And then he started getting better on the floor as well, because that was a huge problem for Humphries. He wasn't performing on the floor on a consistent basis. I think to that point, the best he'd done was one semi-final. And for someone of his talent, that was extraordinary. But in 2021, things would improve exponentially. And changing your lifestyle, changing the way that you have an outlook for your floor events, it all seemed to be starting to go in the right direction.
And then the next year, we see that improvement in terms of results on the Pro Tour. And then we see a dominant force on the Euro Tour. He's beginning to win titles on a frequential basis. This is a guy that we knew had potential and was just beginning to live up to it.
Yeah, the win in Munich against Martin Luckmann was massive. And I think sometimes to break your duck, it's better to play someone in a final that hasn't won as well. So it does have its own pressures, but I think when Luckmann went into that final, he was probably more satisfied with just a final than maybe Humphries would have been. But that win in Munich was huge. It allowed him to remove the pressure from his shoulders, and I'm finally a winner in this kind of setting. And it would just open up a can of worms, because he'd go on to win in Prague, he'd go on to win in Trier, and that was the start of everything for Humphries. He found a comfort and a levity on the stage that he could work with.
Is he the perfect example of how the Euro Tour can really become a springboard for players to then get success elsewhere?
Yeah, I think in that case that's true. It hasn't worked for Dave Chisnell, because he's won a stack of them and hasn't gone on to bigger things like Humphries has. But the way that these tournaments are run with so many fans watching, they have the feel of major events. So if you can win a stack of those, I mean, that's a lot of money. You win 5 of those, that's, 150 grand. It's a lot of money. But it can vault you into a different spectrum of ranking as well. It can take the pressure off the floor. It can take the pressure off getting into the match play, the Grand Prix, and other events like that. And ultimately, it would give the launching pad for Humphries to go on and win them.
He had that dominant year on the Euro Tour in 2022. He's beginning to go deeper, slightly deeper in TV tournaments. And then comes the end of 2022, going into 2023. A lot of people thought that his form on the Euro Tour was enough to get him a berth into the Premier League. He didn't get it. Now, where some players may, for another phrase, get the hump about getting that exclusion from that particular tournament, Luke used that as fuel, didn't he, to really burn the fire?
Yeah, I think he was world number 5 when he was omitted, which took everybody by surprise. But I think his response to not being in that Premier League, it was very mature. And yet again, you can look at it one of two ways. Why am I not in? What have I done wrong? Yada, yada, yada. No, he said, do you know what? Let's put this right then. And as much as we've said that, well, I believe that the Paul Lim defeat allowed him to move on in a better way. I think not being involved in that Premier League after playing as a contender and being the first person to actually win as a contender as well, I think that just gave him extra motivation to make sure that when he was there, it was the right time for him.
There was question marks throughout that year in terms of, he's won a lot of Euro Tours, but can he then win a big TV title? And that was a question mark that was looming over him for some months that year.
I think it looms over everyone. For some people, they can win a big TV event really quickly, like Rob Cross did, and then they don't have that burden. But if you're Dave Chisnell or Terry Jenkins, someone of that ilk, and you carry that burden for more than a decade, it becomes a leech on your back. You can't get rid of it. But the fact that Humphries was able to get that huge title to vault him even further up the rankings for the World Grand Prix, you just got to say he was ready. You've got to be ready to win. You've got to be in the right frame of mind. You've got to have the right energy levels. And for someone as articulate and particular as Humphries, everything needed to come together at the right time, and it just so happened it was the World Grand Prix.
Let's talk about that success then, because it did really feel like a watershed moment. Obviously, he did it with the 138 checkout. He announced his arrival as a major winner in some style.
Yeah, and when someone wins their first, maybe they'll go on to win something again soon after, which he did. But it's really funny to me that the celebration from Humphries was more like he'd scored a hat-trick for Leeds United. Hitting that double 12 and realising a bit of a dream, that was just going to be the start. We can say easily with retrospect that he was always going to go and win more, but the thing is, he plays this game better than most ever have. The records don't lie. Huge averages, incredible technique, incredible ways of hitting 140s better than most people ever have. He's got more in his locker than most have ever dreamed of. So more success was inevitable after that World Grand Prix.
And then you go on and win the Grand Slam, go on and win the place. It was interesting. Then prior to the 2024 World Championship, the rhetoric was, how long could this rivalry between Luke Humphries and Michael van Gerwen go on for? Then suddenly another guy with the same name as him rocks up on the scene.
Yeah, and at the start of that 2024 World Championship, some people were saying he's a great young talent, but this first Worlds for him is just going to be a free hit. But if you looked at Littler's draw, it was a bit of a collision course. The possibilities were there. Chris Mason, our colleague here at the MODUS Super Series, he said he thinks he's going to make the semi-finals. He was right. And in one sense, he was actually wrong because he went one step further. But in a strange sort of way, I've said this for a lot of the last year, Littler's success and his garnering of headlines has taken pressure from Humphries, because everybody wants to be part of the Littler clan, and people aren't talking about Humphries as much. And people have said that is unfair to Humphries. He doesn't care. He just wants to win, and if somebody else is taking the headlines, he'll just go and get the titles. Littler is probably one of the best things that's happened to Humphries because he can still go and do stuff while somebody takes all the paper stuff and all of the media.
We'll talk about that final in a second, but I just want to talk about the legacy of them two, because in tennis you don't talk about Rafa Nadal without Roger Federer, and you don't talk about Roger Federer without talking about Rafa Nadal. Is there a similar feeling with them two that actually whatever they do in their careers, the other person's always going to be spoken in the conversation?
Possibly. I think we need more evidence of this. I think if you'd asked that question about Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, Murray, Del Potro and Wawrinka and other tennis players at the time, you could have speculated on how you would have spoken about them. But I think we need another 5 years to see how this blossoms, because I think we're only in the short realms of what this could possibly be.
Right, let's talk about that final, the final. Has there ever been a game of darts with as much publicity as that one?
The answer is no, because a lot of us were there and we were looking around the press room thinking, what is this? I mean, the previous year when Michael Smith was beating Michael van Gerwen, we got to the venue at around 1:30, 2 o'clock, and we were doing interviews and prepping and stuff like that, and it was normal. You know, the press room was full of the usual media from the papers and YouTube channels and things like that. It was normal. But when the Lukes were going at it, we were seeing people that we'd never seen before, from countries who'd never even been to a final before. They had to make another press room outside of the press room to house the amount of people who wanted to be part of it. And the additional media duties for all of us, it doubled. And the viewing figures were ridiculous. So Littler has changed things, and Humphries deserves credit for this as well, because it would be him that would go on to win the title.
Where were you with the old half and half scarf thing?
Never been a fan of those. I've only got one, and that was when the Steelers played the Vikings at Wembley. I got that, but I wouldn't do that in darts.
In terms of that final, I suppose a lot of people categorise it on that one dart at 2-2 that Luke had to make it 5-2. Luke Littler, of course, that is. If he hits that double, does Luke Humphries have a way back into the final?
Yes, he does, but it'd be very, very hard. Humphries was the better player in the second half of the final, but we can only speculate that if Littler had hit that 2-2, which, let's be frank, he probably shouldn't have left in the first place. If he hits that, he got a 3-set lead?
5-2.
Yeah, it would have only been 2 more sets to be world champion. We can speculate that it would have been easier for Littler, but you've got to remember that after that, he didn't win another set.
And what does that mean for a player like Luke Humphries? You bring it back to 4-3. You know your opponent's missed a big opportunity to stretch a possible unassailable lead. And then from that point onwards, he just went for home, didn't he? He just kept the door shut for Littler.
This is what Humphries does the best, especially in the last 2 years. He can be behind, but he can drag you back in. And then when it comes to finishing the job, we've seen it in Premier League darts over the last couple of seasons. We've seen it in majors, particularly at Minehead. He didn't get the job done against Van den Berg in the UK Open final last year, but he has been able to wind people back into a war, and he can find this calmness under pressure that you really need if you're going to be a world number one for a very long time.
World number one, world champion. And then after that, some of the things he did, he went to Downing Street to meet the Prime Minister. He'd do press that a world champion quite possibly has never had before. But what he also showed is what an incredible ambassador he was for the game. Had time for anyone and everyone. And anyone who's ever been to an exhibition with Luke will know that he'll make sure everybody gets their picture taken. Everybody gets their autograph taken. Not just is he a great player and a great world number one and a great world champion as he was also a brilliant role model for the game.
Yeah, I think a lot of young kids who play darts now, they look up to the likes of Humphries and Littler and the other guys in the top 10 in the world. But I think if this sport is going to blossom the way that we want it to, we need world number ones to understand the responsibility of being the top person. Phil Taylor, world number one for lots of times. He wasn't world number one for massive stretches because other people like Colin Lloyd and Alan Warner-Little and Peter Manley and Rod Harrington would do that as well. But the one thing that Michael van Gerwen taught this generation is if you're world number one for a long stretch of time, it's a responsibility. Michael's carried that torch better than anybody ever has. That's a fact. And Luke is a product of Michael's generation. So when Peter Wright and Gezi Price were world number one. They weren't world number one for a very long time. So they didn't have to shoulder that responsibility for a great deal of a period. But Humphries has had this tag for more than a year. And I think he understands, because he's from Michael's generation, just what it takes to be a good ambassador for the sport, and he does a fabulous job.
And then he do something that very few players have done. Hold the World Championship and the World Match Play at the same time. And people forget, that final against Michael, that could have gone in any direction.
If you consider the way that Michael played the previous year and the way he was able to finish the job in the semi-final and the final, the only time that Humphries was safe was when he hit the second double top to win the title. I think he knew that as well, because getting rid of Michael van Gerwen in great form last summer, that was a tremendous finish and iconic for him because it was another one ticked off the list. But I think it's important sometimes that there's always something you need to get as part of your collection. He hasn't got everything. He's got a lot of them, but there are other things to tick off the list.
So finally then, to wrap up this conversation, that we're not talking about a player at the end of his career. We're possibly talking about somebody right at the very beginning. We don't know what world titles he may win from here. We don't know what else he could win from here and what else he could achieve from here. But what do you expect Luke Humphries' A, legacy to be? He's probably got one now already, despite being so early in his career. And B, what do you expect to see from him over the next few years going forward?
Well, Luke isn't that old. He feels like he's been around forever. But I would say at this juncture, 3 world titles. I think that'd be a decent goal for him. Now that he's got one, it's probably easier to get another one because he knows how to navigate the whole tournament. And maybe one of the only reasons why he hasn't got another one is because on a couple of occasions he's been quite ill at Christmas time. But I think 3 world titles would be befitting someone of his character. If he gets more than that, then we're putting him into the great status ahead of some of the best players that have ever lived. For me, he's already ahead of some of those greats, even though he hasn't got as many titles as they have. But top 10 in the all-time list, very close. And I think he'd like to tick everything off his bingos list. I'm just really looking forward to seeing the legacy that he will start to build.
Nico, thank you very much. Thank you for watching the story of here at the MODUS Super Series on Pluto TV. Do stay tuned for more episodes dropping soon.